Funding for Current Conversations is provided by University of Oklahoma President's Office, University of Oklahoma Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Undiano. Today we're going to be talking about U.S. immigration issues and immigration law. Our guest today is Professor Michael Scaperlanda, who is Jean and Elaine Edwards Family Chair in Law at the University of Oklahoma Law School. He's a specialist in constitutional law, immigration law, and legal ethics. Michael, welcome to Current Conversations. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, R.C. It's great to be here.
How would you characterize the area of law that comes under immigration, especially in regard to Hispanics? How would you characterize that area?
Well, it's very much in flux, as you know, it's a very controversial topic right now.
Could we go back a little bit? Maybe you could fill us in on just a little bit of the lead up to the present. I think a lot of people don't know that most of the Southwest was Mexico, just historically, like a minute ago, in 1848. That complicates things, don't you think?
It does, because you've got families that live on both sides of the border, and the border was very fluid. We didn't even have numerical restrictions on immigration until 1917. So before that, there was no numerical restrictions. People could come and go, as long as they weren't indigent.
So the idea of a border is a pretty recent idea, that's a fixed thing?
Yeah, so the idea of a border is very recent in Western civilization, world history, about 500 years. But even so in Europe, very fluid borders until the rise of the nation state. And in the United States, again, even though we had the border, we had free immigration for the first half of our history.
Yeah. It does seem like when people talk about immigration these days, it's sort of code for, we're going to talk about Mexican Americans because they're such a huge bulk of this. Weren't Mexican Americans actually classified at different moments in American history as white and non-white and then their own category? And
right. So yeah, throughout our history, Mexican Americans and others have come and gone in different categories. Italians were classified as non-white at one time too. So and there was a lot of racial classifications really prior to 1965.
So the cut and dry situation that I think a lot of people want to project, that this is just a legal issue and you're on one side of the border or the other, and if you're on this side illegally, it's a problem. There's a history and a cultural context that really makes this more complicated.
Oh, it really does. And as far as we had a program called the Bracero program that allowed Mexicans to migrate up and work up through World War II. And really, and you see those migration patterns continue even after the law changed. And the way I look at this is we sort of have a stop sign, and then we say, oh, just ignore the stop sign. So we have a law that says you can't come in, but we look the other way.
We've given mixed signals.
We give mixed signals, yes.
Because a lot of American industry, agriculture, for example, is really dependent on cheap labor, basically.
That's right. There are estimates that our milk prices would triple or more if we deported all the illegal labor that's in the United States right now.
You know, I read one estimate of the number of Mexicans that came across the border in the, say, middle to the later part of the 20th century, and it really comes off as one of the largest migrations in history. It's maybe upwards of 5 million. It is really huge, a big movement of people.
It is a very large movement of people.
Yeah. What legislation, what laws do we have to think about to sort of understand this lead up to the present? Isn't there one in 1965 that's very important?
Yeah, there's one in 1965 and also one in 1986.
Okay.
The 1965 one, actually the 1986 one is probably more important to talk about.
Okay.
And that is the Immigration Reform and Control Act. And it's really the one that gives us our current circumstances, leads to the controversy today.
Okay.
And that is that President Reagan and Congress passed this law in 1986, which basically granted amnesty to the 4.5 million, or many of the 4.5 million.
Now, they thought it would be about 1 million initially, right? When they passed the law.
But it turned out to be about 4 million. And the promise was, we're going to clean up past illegal immigration, and it's not going to happen again because we're going to enforce the border, we're going to have border security.
Penalties for employers that hire illegal people. Yeah.
Right. So anybody who's worked, has filled out an I-9 form, prove they have a right to work in the United States. And obviously that law was not effective because now we have 11, 12 million people, undocumented people in the country.
What happened? I mean, when I hear people talk about the comprehensive reform legislation they want to see, pretty much corresponds to what you just described. I mean, why didn't that work?
It didn't work for three reasons. One, we didn't have the technology to really enforce employer sanctions. How do you prove somebody's authorized to work in the United States? They show a Social Security card, they show a birth certificate. Those could be easily...
so that part just became paper law.
Yeah, it became paper law, and there was plausible deniability on the part of employers because the documents were easily counterfeited. We have the technology now to deal with that. Second problem was the penalties for employers hiring undocumented labor was too low. Just part of the cost of doing business. And then the third problem was the law wasn't really enforced by either Republicans or Democrats.
Yeah. So often when you hear people, I guess, trying to get sound bites on something like this, they really bring it down to the issue of the wall. You get a high enough wall and Mexicans will stop coming over the border. It doesn't sound like that's not the direction you're talking. It doesn't sound very realistic.
No, well, it's not real. Well, one thing I remember as a child, we went to then Czechoslovakia, and I remember distinctly that wall between East and West Europe. I would never want to see that in a free country. I mean, machine guns, barbed wire everywhere. It's also not realistic because we've got too much border. It doesn't secure the northern. 2,000
miles.
Yeah, it doesn't secure the northern border. Somebody once said if you built a wall, buy stock in the boat building trade in Mexico.
Right.
So it'd be very difficult to enforce. No, I think the key to enforcement is interior enforcement through employer sanctions that are really enforced.
I know what you mean about the feeling of the wall. I was down in Edinburgh, University of Texas, not too long ago, and it's very close to the border, and I saw it, and it's just kind of chilling.
Yes.
Because it is kind of a wall right there, and it looked like the one in separating East and West Berlin, and I thought, I don't like the feel of this.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. It symbolizes something that's not part of American values.
Yeah. So, okay, we haven't even gotten into the present, but I think that's where we need to go now. But already, this is a very complicated and confusing situation with mixed signals and Mexicans being white and non-white and then their own category, and where does that fit in, and American business wanting illegals, but then the illegals being given another signal, no, don't come in, but do come in. So we've already got a problem, right? Just coming into the present.
Right. That's right.
Okay. So where are we now?
Well, now we're at a political standoff. There are and we've had this under both the Bush administration and the second Bush administration and the Obama administration. Both presidents have wanted comprehensive reform where we grant some sort of amnesty to those that are already here. We increase border security, mostly interior enforcement, and we deal with we have a healthy guest worker program that would allow.
Why do we seem to be allergic to a guest worker program? I mean, you just hear people don't even want to use that language, and it's global, but we don't want to use it here. What's the problem with that, I wonder?
Well, I think part of the problem is thinking that we have a labor shortage or we have a labor surplus here, when labor, we really have a labor shortage. And so I think people are worried about people coming in and taking their jobs. But with the guest worker program, you actually test the labor market. Are there people in the United States ready, willing, and able to do this work? If there are, we don't need these guest workers. If they're not, we bring in the guest workers.
What would you say are the two main approaches to this thinking about this whole area right now out there?
So one is, and this is why we have the impasse, one is border security first. Before we ever talk about what to do with the people that are here illegally now, we secure the border. And again, there's some rationale for that. I'm not in favor of that. I'm in favor of comprehensive reform. But there's some rationale, and that is fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Because you promised 30 years ago that we would clean up the problem of illegal immigration.
It's really a holdover from 1986.
Right,
we said, okay, very few people will get amnesty. We're going to clean this up. a lot of people got amnesty, and we didn't clean it up.
And we didn't clean it up. So I think those that want border security first are fearful that this will encourage more people to come illegally.
Yeah.
The comprehensive immigration proponents, and I'm one of them, say, you have to deal with the 11 or 12 million people that are already here, many of them making a living, contributing to the community.
Who have relatives here, have had relatives here for hundreds of years because it used to be Mexico.
And they have citizen children, because if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen. So yeah, there's a whole complex set of factors that I think lead to the need for comprehensive rather than border security.
Was the president trying to maybe fix the first part of what you said through his first term and into the second term in office, where he's deported like record numbers of people and really put resources down there? Was that an attempt to enact part of that?
I don't know. I'm not sure exactly. I don't know what his motivation was.
Yeah. Okay. And then he did, as an executive order, said basically stop deporting people in certain categories, and that affected up to 5 million people, right? What were the categories?
If you were the parent of either a U.S. citizen child or a permanent resident alien child, you could apply for this DAPA program, D-A-P-A, Deferred Action Program, to stay in the United States legally for up to 3 years, renewable with work authorization.
Now, did that go to a district appeals court? Is that?
Yeah, so the president, through executive order, through the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, adopted this DAPA program. That program was enjoined by the district court in Texas. Said you don't have authority to do this, and right now it's on appeal before the Fifth Circuit.
Oh, okay. Will this likely go on up to the Supreme Court?
Probably.
Okay.
Probably.
Okay. I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay, if you were king of the world, what would you do? What would comprehensive reform look like?
To me, comprehensive reform would first of all, we would secure the border, mostly not through the wall, but through interior enforcement, having a robust employer sanctioned program that said, if you're an employer, you hire somebody who's undocumented, you're going to get fined heavily. We are going to enforce this. And we have the technology now to do that, coupled with a healthy guest worker program.
So close the back door. People coming in illegally.
Close the back door to allow the front door to be open in a healthy manner.
Okay.
And so a guest worker program that ebbs and flows with the economy. Guest worker program would, and I'm ambivalent about this, the guest worker program would have to have one of two features. Either guest workers come in for a very short time, 3 years at a time, then they're out for 3 years and they come back, so they don't develop long-term ties, or the guest workers would have a path to citizenship. I think what we don't want is long-term generational guest workers.
Right. And people worry about the line cuts.
That's
right.
Yeah.
And that's where somebody who's recently gotten interested in legal status somehow gets put the head of the line,
Right.
ahead of people that have been patiently waiting and maybe haven't broken the law.
No. So I want to get back to that in a second. But the third prong of what I would do is then grant some sort of amnesty or earned amnesty, even if amnesty is a bad word, some sort of forgiveness or mercy
to the 11 million.
To many of the 11 million that are here who have laid down roots. As far as the line, the arguments I hear against comprehensive immigration reform really are two. One, that the people that are here illegally are line jumpers, and second, that they're lawbreakers. And my response to both of those, is with line jumping, there is no line long enough. We grant 10,000 unskilled visas a year for permanent residents. So that's 1,000. If we devoted all of those to the 10 or 11 or 12 million illegals here, that's over 1,000-year-long line.
Wow.
We get it. So the first million would be the millionth would be eligible in 100 years from now.
It's just something to clarify, because I didn't understand this before, but we've gone from quotas earlier in the century, maybe before 1910, where it was really race-based quotas, right? To a preference system based on whether you have relatives, a skill. So is that what we're talking about now?
Up until 1965, we did have some racial components to our immigration law.
Okay.
Post 65, we don't have those. right now you can come in as a permanent resident alien, either because of family ties or because of your employment skills.
You're skilled, yeah.
But there still are quotas based upon what country you're coming from. And so there's a balance. We have an attempt for a global balance.
If you go back far enough, it seems to me it gets kind of nasty. I was thinking of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, where particular people, are really targeted, to block it. We don't want any more.
That's right. Yeah. We were talking about the fluidity of the Mexicans, but with the Chinese, we wanted them to help build our railroad, and as soon as they were done,
we're done.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah.
And actually, that leads up to the Japanese internment in World War II. There was on the West Coast in California, there was a very strong anti-Asian sentiment around the turn of the end of the 19th, early 20th century that leads all the way up, I think, to the Japanese internment.
Michael, it occurs to me. I mean, we're of course talking about the law, and I think that's the interesting thread to follow here. But it seems like a lot of what we're having to explain and try to put in place is really cultural context, like a Mexican American being white one year and then non-white another, and then kind of off-white another, and the attitudes about the Chinese. Things are really very much outside the law. They really are in the area of political science.
I don't think we can divorce law from every other aspect of our society.
Yeah. In fact, I'm just kind of playing off of what you said right now. Could it be that attitudes about immigration actually works as a kind of barometer? We talked about this earlier, for maybe confidence in the culture nationally. When Americans are feeling good, the doors kind of open, and when they're not feeling so good about the country, we start trying to close the doors.
I think historically that's been true. Okay. And you think about the Reagan era when this 1986 law on amnesty was adopted. I think people felt pretty good about the United States at that time, about America at that time. Lately, we've been sort of in a kind of a less confident
kind of a protectionist mode as far as immigration goes.
Exactly.
Okay, so getting back to what you were saying, so close the back door, illegal immigration, get the front door open to be more accessible in a legal kind of way through a guest worker program, and then you were talking about a path to legalization, I guess, for the other 11 million. Why is that such a big issue? People just get so angry and so passionate about whether those folks are going to be able to stay or not.
So
it's not all line jumping.
That's right. They're not. Yeah. It's not just line jumping. The other thing is they're lawbreakers, but they're lawbreakers in a way, in a sense, in the way we drive too fast, right? Because we've sent mixed signals.
Yeah.
And so I know I can drive 78 or 80, 79 miles an hour and not get a ticket. They're being told they can't come in, but again the mixed signals. But the other thing about that is Thomas Aquinas, back several hundred years ago, said the positive law may make certain things illegal, but the natural law doesn't. And if I own an orchard and there's a starving person that's walking through that orchard, and they need an orange out of my orchard to survive, it's not theft in a natural law sense to take that orange. And I think many of these folks that are here illegally are exactly like that. They've walked through the desert. They've risked their life to come to work. And to me, those are the kind of workers we want. People that care so much about their families.
Passionate and serious. And they've really gone to a lot of trouble. They want to be in the United States.
And we've, over the years, and we haven't talked about this earlier, but over the years as we built fences in populated areas, we've channeled these folks through the desert. And so it's become much more dangerous for them to cross.
I know there's another set of issues that you've written about, and it has to do with, I think your wording was the fragility of the situation of people who are here illegally. Could you talk about that, just their quality of life and how they're positioned in the culture?
Well, one, they can be exploited by employers because or by spouses, if their spouse is here in a legal status, because there's always a threat of deportation.
So the normal remedy of law is not there for them?
Well, it's there for them, but they're afraid to use it.
Yeah.
Also, sometimes they're afraid to involve themselves with the police. If there's a theft or a drug ring in the neighborhood or something like that, they're afraid to come forward because they're afraid that they might be deported. So they really live in a shadow existence in fear of deportation.
I mean, it really sets them up as victims. Anybody who wants to victimize them, it's probably going to be without any kind of consequence.
Yeah, at least that's a possibility, and
Yeah,
there's a fear of that. And actually, to me, bringing them out of the shadows is one, a just thing to do for them. We need the labor. And the other thing is, if we did that, we could concentrate on deporting the criminals and the terrorists and seeing that. So if we stop this flood of people coming over the border, where a very small percentage of them may be criminals or terrorists, and all of a sudden that whole flow stops, then we'd be able to see the bad people that were trying to cross the border.
That makes a lot of sense.
For bad reasons.
It seems to me that what you're doing here is people bring it down to the whole issue, down to kind of a literal, there are lawbreakers, you know, the law is being broken. It seems to me you're trying to reintroduce social justice into that.
Exactly.
There is the law and then there's social justice, and we're in trouble if those two aren't working together. I think that's what you're saying.
When I talk about this with some folks, I say, would you rather be Jean Valjean or Inspector Javert from Les Mis?
Okay.
And I liken some of the undocumented, not all of them, but some of them, to the Jean Valjeans of the world, and then those those in our midst who would go to any lengths to deport the modern day Jean Valjean, or like the Inspector Javerts.
I was thinking of that line. I think Dickens quotes it where he says, "The letter killeth," and I don't think it's being precise is what kills. It's the letter in isolation, the law outside of social justice, and that's really your point.
Yes.
Okay, so we've closed the back door, we've opened the front door, some path to legalization. It seems to me, though, that we still have a problem, because the sending countries, I think as they're called, Mexico, other places where there probably aren't, there's not employment, there's not jobs, people still have a need to come here. What do we do about that?
Yeah, and this isn't really formally part of immigration law, but I always talk, when I talk about immigration justice, I always say that we need to start with the push factors, pushing people from their home. Because most people don't want to come to the United States or come to a richer country looking for employment where they have to be uprooted, they have to learn a new language and all those sorts of things. They'd probably rather stay in their own.
It's very costly to a family.
It's extremely costly.
Yeah.
And also, in a way, it's unjust too, to not provide the necessary elements of human flourishing in their home country. And so, from the United States perspective, I think one, we can direct some of our foreign aid, because we have a lot of foreign aid, toward those things that would
sending countries.
Towards the sending countries to diminish the push factors. And also, on the other side, maybe some of those countries need a little kick in the pants. Because Mexico can use the United States as sort of a safety valve for some of their social problems. Because to the extent that they can offload part of their population to us, they don't have to address their problems.
Yeah. What else comes into this? What are we leaving out of this picture? I think you've put together a comprehensive solution: the front door, the back door, legalization, and then some kind of program of support for the sending countries. That's a pretty big one, isn't it? I mean, that's a big discussion right there.
And then what we're leaving out of it is what about our marginalized population here? Because if you bring over a nuclear scientist from another country, our nuclear scientists are going to be just fine.
Yeah, right.
But if you bring over somebody who's going to go be a busboy at a restaurant, or bus tables at a restaurant, there's a fear that they're displacing somebody else.
Right.
And so I think we need to address in all of this how we handle our own marginalized population.
I hear a lot, though, the jobs that are actually going to be taken, probably minimum wage jobs, are jobs it's very hard to recruit people to a lot of the time anyway, at least on this side.
Both in the economic immigration literature and just my anecdotal evidence would suggest that.
What do you think is actually going to happen over the next couple of years? You've got the idea of a comprehensive solution, which I totally buy. I like that a lot. But is that on the horizon? Is that?
If you want an honest answer, my honest answer is probably nothing. Because there are these two very different ways of looking at the problem. Now, the president went ahead and his administration went ahead and said, okay, we're going to grant what I'd call soft amnesty to up to 5 million people.
Yeah.
Because he said, look, I can't work with Congress.
Right.
And actually, and I don't think I've said this yet, but I don't think he has the authority to do that.
You think the court was right?
The court's right, yes. Yeah. I mean, I think in that sense, he's legislating from the executive branch, and he's got to work with Congress. We've we've got a democracy.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
slow. It's problematic.
We understand his motivation, and what else is he going to do?
I agree with this substance, but I think
But is it constitutional?
It's not constitutional. So I think Congress and the president have to wrestle with this and work it out. It's interesting. I think if you're asking for my predictions, if there was probably the best chance for comprehensive reform is if there was Republicans controlling every branch in the next 4 years, in the next after the next election, because then they might be able to say, okay, we can all get along, we can all work together. We know we have to find a solution, and maybe they will. I don't know.
And they'd have to be willing to enter that whole process of bringing social justice into the picture, which I think a lot of people from the kind of law and order perspective don't want to do. But that's what you do in a democracy. You sit down and hammer it out. Drug cartels, does that come into this? The drug trade, does that make things more confusing?
Well, both the drug trade and a lot of the more recent anti-immigrant sentiment comes up after 9/11. So you've got the terrorism and the drug trade. I think the folks that are anti-immigrant have used those two issues, the drug cartels and terrorism, as a reason to kind of gin up more anti-immigrant sentiment.
Yeah.
I actually think if we had taken a comprehensive immigration reform approach, it'd be much easier to deal with those problems.
I seem to remember that before 9/11, President Vicente Fox from Mexico and President Bush were actually sitting down and talking about opening up the border a lot.
They were.
Basically going back to sort of an older model that you referenced earlier, and then that just snapped shut after 9/11.
After 9/11, and then Bush got back to it in 2007, but by that time he had no political capital.
Michael, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. I've enjoyed it.
Okay. And thank you for being with us. I'm so glad that you could join us. Please join us next time for more current conversation. Thank you for watching.